Hey everybody! My name is Mike Siebold. I'm a managing partner here at FlowerHire. FlowerHire, building a conscious cannabis community one hire at a time. Today, I'm joined with my friend, colleague, and mentor, Leah Heise. Leah, hi.
Hi, Mike.
How are you?
Very good. It's good to be here.
So today, I wanted to ask you a few questions. One is about, the pervasive need for culture in cannabis, supportive culture, inclusivity. I also want to talk about the Maryland marketplace because I think there's a lot of interesting developments, conversations, and you are in that market specific. But before anything else, introduce yourself to the people out in TV land,
Okay.
Your experience, what you've built, what you've done, and more importantly, just how you are.
All right. Hi, TV land. I'm Leah Heise. I am currently a consultant in the industry. I entered cannabis in 2015, and since that time, I have had 4 exits. I've built and scaled 2 multi-state operators, built a dispensary, sold a dispensary, and helped to build the Cannabis Science Conference and sold the Cannabis Science Conference. And now I am consulting, an external consultant to a company called Kearney, which is a mainstream management consulting company with 3,000 offices worldwide, who have come into this space to help with consumer packaged goods and different strategies, integration plans, and implementation.
And you are a working mother.
And I am a working mother, though my kids are 24 years old, so, empty nester.
How do they, just before anything else, how do they describe what you do?
Mom's a cannabis person.
Mom's a cannabis person. See, breaking the fourth wall. That's the thing that's why I like having these conversations, because somewhere, someplace is going to see this and think or feel some semblance of stigma. And so when you talk about your experience and the fact that the orientation, like your kids, it's any old thing. They become accustomed to it.
When I started, they were in high school, and I was the coolest mom on the planet. So
Still the coolest. Do you bring home product to them?
Sure.
You ever smoke with them?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome. Shake that tree. So the other thing I'm curious about, and I think a lot of people, what was the catalyst? I know that you had been involved in, I think it was an app writing process for a Maryland dispensary, if I remember correctly, but there was a health ailment that got you involved with cannabis first.
Correct. So it was my dispensary, which was the dispensary that I applied for. But I got into the industry because I had chronic pancreatitis, and I had been on methadone, Xanax, very high levels of it. Was told in 2001 by my doctors at that point that I wouldn't be able to work anymore, and I only had 5 years left to live. So went home, my kids were 18-month-old, left my job as a prosecutor, fully intended to stay a prosecutor, be a judge, run a government agency, do something like that. Did not see myself in the business world at all. And then went home, took care of my kids, didn't die, obviously, and thankfully in 2013, my then doctor told me to try cannabis. And I've been able to work. I haven't been hospitalized since 2016. I feel good.
Unbelievable.
It has helped me dramatically.
So that was the catalyst. You had a life-altering experience in an ailment. And somehow, and this is 10 years ago, when cannabis truly still is not necessarily involved from a medical practitioner standpoint, you just happened upon a medical professional that suggested this to you. And since then, you haven't had or subsisted of any problems since?
So I was hospitalized in 2016, but I haven't been hospitalized since. And I started consuming cannabis in 2014.
And that was when you're just like, there's something here, it's demonstrable to myself.
Yeah.
I want to expand this dialogue further. And since then, you've built a litany of different companies.
Yes.
And the sorts of companies, size, scope, I think people are curious about, what you've overseen.
Sure, so different size companies, right? The dispensary certainly was a smaller single state operator. Sold that company to Forefront, went inside of Forefront Ventures as their chief experience officer and their chief compliance officer, helped to build the infrastructure to help them scale. They had a public exit. After the public exit, I was recruited by you from there to Ascend Wellness Holdings and ended up as their chief administrative officer overseeing legal compliance, HR, and helped to scale them from 73 employees to 1,956 in 19 months. during COVID, which was a super, super fun time.
Oh, that's right. It was during COVID.
It was during COVID.
Oh my God.
During COVID. They went public in 2022, and then I left to go try my hands at some other things. And Cannabis Science Conference, we started, way back in 2016, and sold it this past year.
I'm actually curious about the conference because so every time a market comes alive, there are so many associations. It's kind of a slipshod ascent, not just of the industry, but all the ancillary participating people that want to create focus on the industry. Tell me more about that conference, because I think cannabis is interesting where a lot of people, you and I both know it's a multitude of things.
Yep.
Right? We know that it's a medicine. We know that the pharmacological implications are huge. We know that the retail experience and the adult use size is also massive. When you created a conference around science, what was the focal point?
Initially, it was just on the specific studies that existed worldwide, not allowed in the US, because of course we can't, right? On what cannabis does and what it can do as a medicine, focused on childhood cancer with Tracy Ryan from Canna Kids. Also having a cultivation science track to understand strain genomics. How do you do cultivation, and then also how do you do lab testing? How do you take samples? What does that look like? One of the biggest successes of that conference was a boot camp that was set up that all kinds of attendees could attend, whether it be a scientist or a researcher or a strain genomist, or just a general person that wanted to understand a little bit more of how the industry works. And it would show everything from lab extraction, how do you run a gas chromatograph. It was very, very science focused, and that was the goal. We had dreams of doing a journal of cannabis science, and maybe someday that will come, but
I think it's important to just, for folks at home, to realize the largest acquisitions that have happened in cannabis are not on the adult use retail side. They've been specifically pharmaceutical and pharma application based companies.
that's correct.
I think it was GW Pharma with Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and then Pfizer with, was it Arena? In combination of about 14 billion, I think, in total acquisition costs, which is a mind-boggling number, but kind of showcases the fact that this is a multitude of things and validated.
And science matters, and it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of work internationally, and the work that's coming out of the international markets is primarily driven by the pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
So pharmaceutical companies that I'm working with are in Europe, looking into Africa and South Africa to grow their specific strains to see what use cases they may have for them. So it's an interesting world out there.
It's so large.
It is so large, and we are a peanut. And the prediction is that by 2026, we won't be the world leader in cannabis anymore, the US.
Who will be?
The rest of the world.
Oh, everybody else?
Probably Germany.
Is it that large?
Germany is the largest economic market. It's probably equivalent to California, if not larger. And it's going to drive cannabis policy internationally. It's fascinating.
Germany is going to, wow. So we're, in so many regards, or in so many ways, our prohibitive stance, which could give us a massive edge on the world stage in terms of not just what cannabis is, but what it could be, we're basically silencing ourselves and diminishing our ability to be number one because, and by virtue of that, other world leaders will step in.
Oh, 100%. We are already losing because we can't import or export.
I know.
And there are countries all over the world already doing it.
Let's bring it back home for a second.
Right.
You gave me this, which is such a
Maryland.
nice gift. Probably going to get sued.
It's a good advertisement for Fisher's Popcorn.
I was about to say, Old Bay, come on in, right? We love savory snacks that are infused products, but Maryland, so a lot of markets have actually recently gone live. Missouri is the latest and greatest, which has been doing very well. For those of you who are aware, if I remember correctly, it was early February, so we're just a shade over a month. I think we're 5 or 6 months in from adult use, and the numbers have been spectacular.
Yep, they're doing great.
Having started in Maryland, and the supreme irony of, for as long as you've been in cannabis, for the first time actually having adult use where you are, what can we expect? What do you think we should look forward to?
So I think Maryland is going to be an interesting market. They've created a different licensing type. It's called a micro retailer.
Micro retailer.
Which is, it's sort of the ice cream truck model for delivery.
Oh, sure.
So you are only going to be allowed to deliver product through through one of those micro retailers. The actual retail stores themselves will not be able to deliver.
Whatsoever.
I predict lots of lawsuits. The new bill, which are kind of moving through the House and Senate simultaneously, they've had some amendments to them, but I think one of the most interesting things, or some of the most interesting things, are if you have 4 dispensaries in the state of Maryland, which was the current cap, you are going to be mandated to divest 2 of those.
Is that legal?
They are invalidating the entire medical program and recreating the program from the ground up to avoid potentially it being a taking. Now, I do believe lawsuits are going to slam this market shut for a while.
Really? So that's not uncommon, everyone at home. These markets get hyper litigious somehow. That being the case, I think there was a Benzinga article that stipulated that adult use sales should be able to start in July, but given the fact that you are compelled to divest, having been in good standing with the state for so long at 4, and now you're going to be diminished to 2 retail stores, there's obviously going to be lawsuits because that is absolutely wild. When do you think the market could start?
I do think somehow they will start sales July 1st.
Okay.
And I do think some stores, maybe a holder of 4 stores will convert 2 of the licenses and then go to court for the other 2 so that they don't have to divest, right? But if you're one of those holders out there that has 4 stores, you better start looking at them now and thinking about if divestiture is something that you want or need, or do you want to go litigate. But the other problem is the fees that they are putting on dispensaries and cultivators and processors are based on your gross revenue. So if you are a dispensary and you did $5 million a year last year, you're going on gross. Doesn't matter net because we know they're not making any money, right? You're going to pay $500,000, or it might be $250,000, but you're going to pay an exorbitant amount of money just to convert your license into adult use. So they are actually penalizing the very operators who stood their businesses up, and it is essentially, in my mind, an unconstitutional tax.
So just to rehash, because I'm overwhelmed, if you have more than 2 stores, so it doesn't have to be 4, but more than 2, you're going to be compelled to divest to basically, for a prescriptive cap at 2.
Yep.
Fair or not, that's just what's mandated. And then, if you happen to have been one of the more successful groups, right, where your gross revenue is of a certain stature, there's a levy of anywhere from 5 to 10% to convert from medical to adult use.
Yep.
So you're getting taxed for being productive, and then you're being handicapped because you've been successful for as long as you have, because the state wants to start over from 5 to 2 or 4 to 2, anything above 2 stores.
What they're trying to do is rectify that. The social equity aspect of it never rolled out very well.
Right.
And they don't like multi-state operators. What they want to see is it being a homegrown Maryland industry, and they feel that multi-state operators are not benefiting the state, that they're controlling supply, and they want to eliminate that. Do I think this cap will do it? No.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing is every state has an interpretive stance about how they want to put forward legislation and regulatory obligations for any operator. So, and they're subject to change. That's the thing. We start out with these and then they change over time. We've seen that in Illinois, we've seen it in Connecticut, they morph. But it seems kind of odd that because you want to keep it homegrown heroes and you want to get rid of special interests or MSOs, to penalize the constituency in the market seems kind of counterintuitive, very counterintuitive.
Very.
So you're basically trying to create an equal playing field by bringing everyone down, even though those people are still homegrown heroes.
That's right.
So there's going to be massive lawsuits.
Oh, massive. Massive, massive. And everybody's pushing towards July 1st, the legislatures. And I hope all of you business owners in Maryland are looking at your stores. Do you have enough throughput? What do your POSs look like? Are you staffed? FlowerHire's here. Really have somebody do an assessment on those stores, because switching from adult use to, or switching from medical to an adult use store is dramatically different. Those
Right.
stores look very different. When we were at Ascend, I mean, just the flip to Illinois saw us doing on average like 70 transactions a day to 2,200 overnight. So there's a lot of considerations to think about. Do you have enough bathrooms?
Right.
Is your vault big enough? Do you have enough supply? We're 3 months out. You better start thinking about that now. You probably should have been thinking about it a couple months ago.
So by the way, we will post information for you to call Leah. Well, let's talk about best practices for a second, because this is exciting. You talked about that conversion from medical to adult use. Mm-hmm. Preparation is everything. One of the things that we try to do at FlowerHire when it comes to hiring folks is also have the advisory side of the business. This is a shameless plug, where it's all about preparation for not just what you're today statically, but what you're going to be, but also how the paradigm might shift in your marketplace, which happens dramatically. What are some of the best practices that people at home could glean from your expertise? Like, what are some of the 4 or 5 things that operators need to do or be aware of or just be conscious of? And we'll talk about culture. I think that's front and center.
I agree.
But
Culture's number one.
the 101, what are some things that people can do today to progressively get better?
Sure. Number one, we'll talk about culture afterwards, but to me, number one is culture. You want your staff to stay with you and become your brand ambassadors. They're the best brand ambassadors you have, so culture is important. Number 2, get very comfortable with data. Figure out what your data is. If you're a retailer, what's your average cart size? How many customers are flowing through a day? What are your peak hours? Are your hours long enough? Really assess and use the data, as limited as may be, that you have available to you, and figure out how you can manipulate some very few levers to increase your bottom line. And you can. It's not that difficult. For example, how many SKUs are you selling? And if you look across your SKU portfolio, are only 10% of them performing? Why are you selling 253 SKUs? You probably don't need that. There's ways you can manipulate your SKU portfolio.
Right, get rid of the excess.
Yeah, get rid of it. What are some other ones? I mean, some is just analyze your throughput, right? For going into an adult use market. If you have a store, for example, and it is 15 by 20 and has 2 POS stations, you need to start thinking about omni-channel. You need to think about delivery. Can you do pickup windows? Do you have the ability to do drive-through? Can you put lockers in your stores? Can you do express lanes? There's different ways to do it depending on your footprint. Can you enlarge? Do you have enough money on hand to do some CapEx to enlarge? And then if you're on the processing and grow side, there's a whole other set of metrics that you need to be looking at. But business intelligence is real and it's important. And for a long time, we've been very blessed in the industry to sort of build it and they will come.
Right.
But we aren't there anymore.
Right.
There's lots of builds and they can pass right by you to go to somebody else. So you better figure out how you're getting them into your store, keeping them in your store, and getting them out of your store. And also make sure you have really good wholesale accounts.
When it comes to, it's true. When it comes to culture, right, that, for us, just speaking for me and the best team in the game with FlowerHire, culture is our strategy. That's one of the things that we do. We try to pervasively showcase the fact that we care about one another, and by virtue that we care about everyone outside. That's not necessarily shared. That's not necessarily propelled. That can be absent in many instances. Having been a part of so many companies and cultures, what are some of the teachings, if you could, whether it's an HR leader or a newly minted founder or an executive that is trying to build the next latest and greatest multi-state operator or single state operator, or just someone who's participating day in, day out, how can we contribute to a collective culture that is inclusive and smart and forward-thinking, as well as, that's a larger pervasive whole, as well as what can we do on a day-to-day basis for where we are from a company standpoint? Loaded questions, I know.
Yeah, sure, big questions. I mean, the very first thing you have to do is you have to be intentional about the culture that you want to create, right? We see it a lot as a talking point in the industry. People know culture is important. They know that having more females in your company is important, that having more minorities in your company is important, and they speak to it, but there's no real activity to it. And I'm not necessarily saying set up quotas or things like that, but really be intentional in who you're hiring. What are the particular personality traits that you're looking for to fit with your culture? Hire for those. You don't want to necessarily create a homogenous company where everybody thinks the same, because you want to have challenges, and you want to have people learn how to deal with other different skill sets and different personality types. But find out what really resonates well with you as a leader, if you're the CEO or you're the board, and create a culture kind of backwards from there. Some of the other cultural things are pay your people well. People want to get paid. They deserve to get paid well. And make sure people know what their pay scales are.
Right.
And what their roles and responsibilities are. Define them. Let them know what you expect of them. What are their KPIs? Do performance plans. It's not that difficult. I promise you can get one off of the internet. FlowerHire can help you. Create a performance plan so people know how they're going to grow with the company, and they will stay with you. If you treat them as if they are no more than a cog in the wheel, that's all you're going to get. You're going to get a butt in the seat. You're going to get somebody not engaged with your company, and it's not a great thing. And communicate. We talk about communication a lot. We try different methodologies of communication, but you have to hit all of the employees in the different ways they'll learn. So if you're doing an onboarding and somebody is a visual learner, then you need to make sure that your onboarding and training and engagement and continued engagement works for that person, as well as an audible learner, and other different types of learners. You need to continuously evaluate and work. And then the other thing that it is culture, but not culture. It's one of the things I find that people get frustrated with a lot, and where I see a lot of companies fall down, is not understanding the roles and responsibilities that go into decision making. Decision making is often housed in one particular area. If it's a finance-driven company, that all the decisions are going to be made in finance, and sometimes they're going to be made without input from any other department. And when you do that, it leaves the people who are out of the decisions with the consequences of bearing the burden of answering to that decision, but also very frustrated because they might know that that decision, while saving money a little bit, isn't long-term going to move the needle. And it actually may cause a worse problem than if you had just included the right group of people in the conversation from the first place.
I think you bring up a really good point, which is culture is calibration, right? It's not like we do a quarterly launch and we talk about it, and then we kind of have a pervasive viewpoint and we share that viewpoint, but it's kind of temporary, because ultimately it's just about making sure that the business grows versus trying to grow ourselves. And I think, and I don't want to throw shade at everyone in cannabis, because again, a lot of people and a lot of companies in cannabis are first time.
Sure.
Right? There's no global consensus on how to grow weed. There's a myriad of ways that you can preach and teach culture. But I think what I notice more often than not is kind of an idea that culture is something that you speak to when it's relevant, when someone has an issue, versus the idea of revisiting the topic all the time with your people, because cultures do change. People grow into themselves. To your point, when you have communication that's interdepartmental, or across the spectrum in terms of from company to company, from business to business, you're on display all the time. And that display starts to get kind of corrupted and corrosive when you're not validating it in real time. You're just kind of saying, well, this is what we do, and that's not subject to change, right? There can be a steadfastness and kind of like an iron grip on what culture should be, because that's what you decide it should be, versus getting as a collective with however many people you have and saying, how do we define ourselves?
It's iterative, right?
Yeah.
It's going to change. You as a medical company in Maryland right now, it's going to look very different than your adult use market. In fact, your culture is likely to change completely, because your medical focused staff may not want to be adult use
Right.
staff.
Some people want to just serve patients.
That's right.
Right.
So how
that's the
can
calling.
you build a company that still allows those people that want to just serve medical patients do that, maybe a medical express lane, telehealth, there's ways to do it, while still allowing for adult use market so that you can get a little bit of a revenue bump.
Those are great insights. Newsflash, fast question. Is there a sort of company that has not been created yet that you'd be really excited to see? I have mine.
Yeah, there's definitely companies I am interested in. I'm fascinated by the distribution companies, and I know that a few have been created, not newly from the ground up yet. That's not a new one, but the distribution model, I'm fascinated with long term, right? Because we have to expect that when federal legalization happens, distribution is going to be vital. So I'm very, very interested in that. What have you got?
Live event consumption.
That's happening.
Where? Well, I know it is happening. You know, the folks up Embark up in Tahoe
And Nevada.
and Nevada. Well, that's on-site
Live Nation
consumption.
is working.
Yeah, so they're knocking the door. So here's the interesting thing. It's so obvious because people are already doing it. But to create an experience, where it's a cannabis concessionaire where you can host people and propel different kinds of brands, like because you have access to all these people at one time. I'm really excited about that because it's not untested, but it's not domestically proven.
Right.
It's kid tested, not necessarily mother approved. And the interesting thing is it lends itself to so many different mediums, right? It's not just like a rock concert or a rap show or anything like that. It can be pervasive to all different walks. I mean, one of the ideas that I heard was Southwest features a lot of rodeos. People smoke a lot of weed at rodeos, despite our best belief that it's probably just beer and gin. It's not.
Same
It's a
with
lot of weed.
NASCAR.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. I'm kind of curious about how we eke ourselves into the mainstream. Like the very concept of me going to a stadium of any sort and watching any kind of sporting experience where I have a gummy that I kind of have for myself versus the idea of having a cannabis beverage, which is a good piece of news for 3 hours. At what point, what is the tipping point and where do we start seeing that? These first companies we're seeing come to market are starting to do that.
They are.
And that's when we start seeing people in real time, not inside a dispensary who have made the conscious decision, but someone not with the wherewithal or the know-how sitting around someone who is consuming something somehow, whether it's beverage or otherwise, and seeing like, oh, this is any old thing, breaking the fourth wall.
Right.
Those sorts of things light me up.
I like consumption lounges too. I haven't figured out the best model for a consumption lounge, but
It's tough.
yeah,
It's a tough business.
It is very tough, especially with regulations that say you can't serve food, you can't serve alcohol. So what is it? It's a cover charge to go inside somewhere. That is not an experience.
Right. Well, it's also like if you look at cannabis, to look at parallel industries or specific paradigms, in the restaurant world and hospitality, as you know, everyone makes margin on alcohol, right? You are surcharging it, and macro inflationary pressures don't really change that. Whereas in cannabis, we have so much oversupply. We know that people have, the prices are reducing, so you're asking someone to pay for basically a table when they could just easily go outside.
Right.
So it's all about the attempts, though, because
It is.
ultimately this is all high-risk experimentation.
I like them for college towns
Oh yeah.
because you can't smoke in your dorm,
Right.
and it's a good place for you to meet other.
Safer.
Yep, safer. So I do like it for college towns, but I really do think they need to allow you to dispense to a consumption lounge. Even if that comes from a dispensary and there is a track and trace to the consumption lounge and you pick up at the consumption lounge.
Oh, interesting. Like basically like order ahead and then consume on site.
Yep.
Oh, I like that. There's a group actually, the Artistry. So West Hollywood here in Los Angeles actually features, I think it's one of the largest concentrations of consumption lounges in the United States. Not in the world, obviously, that's Amsterdam.
I just talked to a guy yesterday that owns a dispensary in Santa Monica that wants to open one.
Yeah, and so the
In
Artistry.
West Hollywood.
So it's a great concept. It's a really beautiful store. Bottom floor is the dispensary, and then to the right there are a small flight of stairs that go up where you can go to they have a consumption lounge, so you can take your purchase upstairs, or you can order from menu up there. And the great thing is about the food, when you order it, it's actually ordered out. So it's kind of akin to like a DoorDash or an Uber Eats, but it's brought to you. So that's kind of an interesting quirk.
So the way I would do that one,
Yeah.
so that I'd get more money, would be I would create a catering company. You only order from my own food, and then I would deliver it like DoorDash to the thing. But it wouldn't be a restaurant that is physically connected to the thing. It just would be.
I like that.
Then I'm still controlling all of it.
What kind of food?
Well, I'm vegan, so I'd probably do.
That's so on brand for cannabis. So crunchy.
So I would probably do some vegan and entrees. I don't think I would go high level with it. I think I would do fun, snacky, good nachos, tacos, good, good food.
For people that are feeling themselves, that are maybe.
In Maryland, a good crab feast would be fun.
That sounds great. Well, I'm getting a signal from the Politburo that time is up.
Shut
We disagreed.
I like crab.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Again, Leah, thanks for coming.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We will be circulating Leah's contact information for all of you out there that need the best and brightest when it comes to Carney. Anything in terms of me and FlowerHire, there will also be additional information. But thanks again for tuning in. Questions, concerns, insights, answers, please feel free to hit us up on the interwaves or LinkedIn. Take care, bye.